He was definitely targeted, and I think it was the start of all the other accusations.
Michael Jackson didn't die from a drug overdose. Instead, it was all the result of years of pressure, betrayal, and powerful enemies Michael had developed during his time in the industry. For the courts, the case ended after Dr. Conrad Murray was convicted of giving Michael a fatal dose of the anesthetic propofol, along with other sedative medication, which led to his death. But for Michael's bodyguards, family members, close friends, and even some public commentators, that was never the complete story. And now, years after his death, the people closest to Michael are challenging what the public has believed for years and what may have actually led to his death. Let's get into it. Bill Whitfield's warning. Before anything went wrong, Michael said something to his bodyguard, Bill, that didn't make sense. It was right after Michael signed on for the This Is It shows in London, the comeback everyone had been waiting for. But instead of celebrating, Michael turned to Bill and said, "Now you're gonna see the vultures coming." At the time, Bill didn't think much of it. But then it happened. Almost overnight, people Michael hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanted to be part of his life again. His phone never seemed to stop ringing. Everyone wanted a meeting. That's when Bill understood. Michael wasn't being paranoid. He already knew what success would bring. However, long before that comeback tour, Michael had already been living under enormous pressure. Michael was opening his home to sick children, welcoming struggling families to Neverland, and even paying medical bills for those who couldn't afford them. Michael believed he was helping people. But his acts of generosity were twisted into accusations. Families Michael tried to help later pursued him for money, and Bill has never believed those claims reflected the man he knew. At the time, Michael wasn't just one of the biggest entertainers in the world. He had become one of the most powerful businessmen in music. When Michael bought the Beatles' catalog, it changed everything. The deal made him incredibly influential, but Bill says it also damaged important relationships. Life became increasingly difficult for Michael. The family regularly received death threats while staying in hotels. Sometimes threatening letters were left at the front desk. When that happened, they would quietly pack their bags and leave in the middle of the night. And then came the day no one expected. When Bill first heard the news, he refused to believe it. But after watching Jermaine Jackson step to the podium, the truth became impossible to deny. Michael was gone. The world seemed to stop moving for Bill. And when asked what really killed Michael Jackson, Bill said, "Michael Jackson left. This world was mean to him." Because for him, the story is far more complicated than most people think. In his own words, there were several pieces of involvement, not just one person. But Bill was only seeing one side of Michael's world. There was another man who stood even closer and watched the pressure build day after day from behind closed doors. His name was Matt Fides. And years later, when Matt finally began sharing what he had seen, his memories painted an even darker picture of Michael's final years. Matt Fides breaks silence. Unlike most people, Matt wasn't just watching Michael perform. He was watching him survive. According to Matt, Michael lived under extraordinary security. There was always a doctor nearby. Protection followed him everywhere he went, not because he wanted special treatment, but because he genuinely believed someone might one day try to kill him. But for Matt, the real turning point came years before Michael's final days. It came after the release of Invincible. Michael believed it was one of the greatest albums he had ever made. He sold 5 million copies of the album, which would have been a dream for many artists. But for Michael, it felt like a failure. Compared to Thriller, the album that sold over 70 million copies, it wasn't even close. And there was a reason for that. Matt remembers Michael becoming increasingly frustrated, convinced Sony wasn't promoting the album the way they should have. The pressure became so overwhelming that he would sometimes lock himself in the bathroom and cry, believing years of his work had been wasted. But according to Matt, this wasn't just about an album. There was far more at stake. To finance Invincible, Michael had reportedly borrowed around $200 million from Sony. In return, he put up his most valuable possession as security, his music catalog, which included the Beatles, Elvis Presley, Eminem, and countless other valuable songs. If the album failed, that catalog could be lost. And that belief weighed heavily on him. But by far, the most painful thing happened only days before Michael died. It was a phone call on the Tuesday night before his death. Matt says Michael sounded completely different. His speech was erratic. He seemed confused. During the conversation, Michael casually mentioned that a doctor had given him something. And then he asked for the phone number of his father, Joseph Jackson. Now, for Matt, that was very strange because Michael rarely contacted his father. That's when Matt realized something heartbreaking. Despite being surrounded by assistants, lawyers, security guards, and business associates, Michael seemed incredibly alone. Matt remembers Michael even speaking briefly with his young daughter, almost as if he simply wanted to hear a familiar voice before ending the call. And perhaps the most disturbing question Matt raises isn't about the phone call at all. It's about the doctors. He believes some doctors made Michael dependent on medication, then convinced him he needed them to manage problems they had helped create. Whether that was true or not remains a matter of opinion. But hearing Matt describe those final months leaves one question hanging in the air. If this was what Michael's bodyguards witnessed, what did the people closest to him believe? What Michael's friends saw? The people who knew Michael from inside the music industry had their own memories. Teddy Riley, who worked closely with Michael for years, was asked, "Who killed Michael Jackson?" But Teddy didn't give an answer. He later admitted that getting involved in those conversations had already caused problems in his life, and staying quiet was the best option. Smokey Robinson recalls learning that a doctor had been living in Michael's home, giving him whatever medication he wanted. During his own surgery, a nurse told him the anesthesia being used was the same drug that killed Michael. That realization shocked Smokey and made Michael's death even more heartbreaking. But perhaps the most emotional memories came from someone who wasn't just a colleague. He was family. Michael's older brother, Tito Jackson, still remembers the moment he learned the news. He says it was the worst feeling he had ever experienced. He had lost relatives before, but losing his own brother was different. And then there is Michael's mother. According to Tito, she always taught her children to forgive people, even when they made painful mistakes. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Tito believes the doctor failed Michael in the one way that mattered most. As a physician, he should have been watching his patient. Instead, Tito believes he wasn't giving Michael the attention and care he needed. So after listening to all these voices, one thing becomes clear. Each person remembers a different part of Michael's final years, but together, they all describe the same picture, a man carrying far more than the world ever realized. And that raises one final question. What really happened to Michael Jackson? Beyond the official story. The official investigation may have ended, but the theories never did. Even years after Michael's death, people continued to debate what really happened behind the scenes. Even Joe Rogan has discussed some of the unusual claims. One of the stories he mentions comes from Michael's own doctor, who claimed Michael had been chemically castrated as a child to preserve his singing voice. Whether that claim is true or not isn't the point. It's the fact that stories like these continue to fuel doubts about how much of Michael's life the public ever really understood. But no one pushes those questions further than commentator Dr. Umar Johnson. According to Dr. Umar, Michael wasn't just one of the greatest entertainers in history. He was also one of the smartest businessmen in the music industry. And that made him a threat. He believes Michael's ownership of the Beatles' catalog gave him enormous power, creating tensions with some of the biggest names in the industry. And then there was his album, Invincible. He believes it was deliberately held back, pushing Michael deeper into debt so he would eventually be forced to give up his valuable music catalog. According to Dr. Umar, Michael had no intention of letting that happen. Instead, he announced the This Is It comeback concerts, believing the tour would allow him to repay what he owed while keeping control of his life's work. But that comeback never happened, and just weeks before the first show, Michael was gone. Michael's bodyguards, his friends, his family, and even public commentators don't all tell the same story. Yet many of them share one belief, that there was far more happening behind the scenes than the public ever knew. So what, after hearing it all, what do you believe actually happened to Michael Jackson? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more deep dives like this. We'll see you in the next one.